A streak of white-hot light cut across the violet sky of Zevri Prime, the floating capital of the Dominion. From a distance, it appeared as if a second sun had ignited, piercing the delicate lattice of crystalline towers. Patrol drones, sleek and humming with blue energy, swerved mid-flight, alerted by the unauthorized vessel, a human shuttle, small, solitary, and unarmed. Every sensor in the city blinked warnings, every Zevri eye fixed in disbelief. Below, the city's streets shimmered with bioluminescent rivers of traffic, hovering platforms carrying citizens in elegant anti-gravity conveyances. The Zevri, tall and angular, their skin refracting the ambient light like shards of glass, stopped in their routines, craning necks to follow the streaking intruder. Murmurs rose, a low hum of speculation and fear. No human had entered Zevri airspace in recorded history, not one. And here it was, descending with calculated precision. The shuttle's engines coughed, dimming to a ghostly glow as it cut its descent toward the palace district. Security drones streaked in formation, their weapons ready, but none dared engage immediately. Protocols demanded confirmation first. The human emerged from the shuttle before the doors even fully sealed. He stepped onto the polished landing pad, his boots clacking softly against the crystalline surface. Around him, hundreds of Zevri soldiers froze. Some whispered, others tilted their heads in confusion. He wore nothing but a dark, fitted suit, with subtle metallic lines that shimmered in the city lights. No weapons, no armor. Yet he moved with a confidence that spoke louder than any battle cry. His eyes scanned the sprawling palace skyline, the spires floating effortlessly on anti-gravity, nodes the bridges suspended between towers like strands of silk, without a trace of hesitation. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then alarms blared, drones pivoted, weapons glowing as they locked onto the lone human. But even as the warning lights bathed him in red, he walked forward. Each step was deliberate, almost ceremonial, cutting through the tension like a blade. The crowd of nobles watching from hovering balconies gasped, some clutching their ornate robes in shock. Whispers of prophecy and madness spread among them. No human could survive here. Unless... Inside the palace, the central surveillance hub flickered. Technicians stared at live feeds, unable to comprehend the readings. The human's shuttle had bypassed all detection grids, and the pattern of his approach defied every algorithm. They had. The system's predictive AI flagged the incident as anomalous and high risk, a warning it had never issued before. The first line of defense, the hovering Zevri guards, towering with articulated limbs, lowered their energy shields, unsure whether to engage or retreat. The human's presence disrupted their equilibrium, an unpredictable element that made their perfectly ordered tactics obsolete. Cameras tracked him as he moved toward the palace gates. Every observer could see the unflinching calm in his stride, the way he ignored the threats that would have felled the strongest Zevri warrior. From the shadows of a nearby spire, an elderly Zevri counselor muttered under her breath, eyes wide. He walks as if the universe bends for him. This is not natural. Her words carried weight. The council's ancient texts spoke of a human, a singular figure whose arrival would mark the undoing of empires. Most had dismissed the prophecy as myth, until now. The shuttle's engines powered down completely behind him, leaving a soft hum in the air, almost ceremonial in its stillness. The human paused at the threshold of the palace gates, towering, spires reflecting in his dark eyes, and glanced around at the gathering crowd. Not a flicker of fear, not a hesitation. Then, with a subtle tilt of his head, he continued forward. Every Zevri present felt the weight of that single human step. It was a challenge, a statement, and a warning. He was here. He had arrived. And the Dominion had no choice but to notice. The city seemed to hold its breath, the very air trembling as if anticipating what would come next. In that suspended moment, the moral was clear even to the youngest Zevri observer. One small step, taken with unshakable courage, could ripple across an empire and perhaps, just perhaps, change the fate of the galaxy itself. The palace gates loomed above him like the jaws of some ancient predator. Crystalline towers stretched beyond sight, their surfaces catching Zevri sunlight and fracturing it into 1,000 blinding shards. Gravity fields shifted subtly as the human approached, yet he walked steadily, each step precise, deliberate. Drones circled closer, their sensors humming in low-frequency agitation. The Zevri soldiers' weapons raised, energy crackling along sleek, articulated arms. But still, none moved to strike. For a moment, the air seemed to vibrate, heavy with anticipation. The human silhouette, small, almost fragile compared to the alien giants, projected confidence that defied logic. Every Zevri present instinctively understood that brute force alone would not stop him. Something about the way he carried himself unnerved them more than any weapon ever could. A patrol unit hovered just meters ahead, its armored limbs poised to strike. Their commander, a towering figure with a translucent exoskeleton, issued the standard warning. Halt. Identify. Yourself or be neutralized. The human paused, slowly lifting his head to meet the alien's gaze. I've come to speak, he said, voice steady, resonant, cutting through the mechanical whir of drones. There was no fear, no arrogance, just calm, and the faintest trace of purpose. The Zevri commander hesitated, a ripple of unease passing over his crew. In all recorded history, no human had approached the palace unarmed, not one. And yet here was one walking without hesitation, daring even to speak. The tension tightened like a wire stretched to its breaking point. As he passed the patrol, the camera-like eyes of the drones tracked his every move. The human navigated between beams of energy and hovering security barriers as if he were a shadow walking in the sunlight. Each step was measured, anticipating the smallest fluctuation in the environment. A drone fired a pulse meant to deter him, a warning shot, but it fizzled against a subtle device on his wrist, absorbed and rerouted harmlessly. Above, the palace's grand halls shimmered with levitating bridges and cascading lights. Nobles watched from crystal balconies, whispering in panicked tones. Some were fascinated, some horrified. Their eyes flickered between the human's calm stride and the flaring red lights of the defensive grid, trying to reconcile their centuries of training with the impossibility before them. Inside the palace, the Emperor's central command monitored the breach. Screens displayed multiple angles of the approaching intruder. Technicians shook their heads. The human had bypassed all layered defenses, stealth fields, gravitational traps, automated interceptors. The system flagged him as anomalous threat, priority, catastrophic. The human entered the first courtyard and the ambient hum of power fields vibrated through his boots. Holographic banners shifted and pulsed with light, reflecting the alien nobility's awe. He paused to glance at a crystalline fountain, where water-like plasma arced in impossible shapes. Then, without hesitation, he continued, stepping lightly, but firmly over the threshold of Zevri authority. Every drone, every soldier, every eye followed him. Suspense coiled in the air, thick and electric. Even the wind seemed to slow, carrying whispers of disbelief. Citizens hid behind crystal pillars, peeking at the human who dared walk where none had before. The palace gates behind him sealed shut, with a resonant clang. The sound echoed, a metallic punctuation to his arrival, trapping him and everyone else in this charged moment. The human looked upward, scanning the vast atrium, and a small, knowing smile curved at the corner of his lips. It was a smile that suggested he knew something no Zevri had yet realized. The fear, the order, the might of the Dominion, all of it was fragile. From the shadows, a young Zevri scribe whispered to his companion, "They say a single human can topple dynasties." His words trailed off as the intruder walked onward, every step echoing in the polished corridors. The nobles shifted uneasily, murmurs spreading like fire through dry grass. What is he? Why is he unafraid? How can he move so freely? The human reached the threshold of the inner sanctum, dwarfed by the grandeur of the levitating platforms and spiraling towers, yet undeterred. The moral of the moment was unmistakable. Courage, confidence, and resolve can make even the smallest figure loom larger than the mightiest empire. One bold step could ripple through centuries of power, challenging every assumption the Zevri had held about superiority, fear, and control. And so he walked on, unflinching, into the heart of the Empire. Every eye followed, every pulse quickened, and every doubt began to take root. One human had arrived. One step had been taken. And with it, the first crack in the Dominion's flawless armor appeared. The human stopped at the base of the Emperor's Hall, a colossal structure that floated above the palace on invisible fields of anti-gravity energy. Its walls shimmered with shifting patterns of light, refracting the sun into dazzling streaks that danced across the courtyard. Every inch of the hall radiated power, a reminder that this was the nerve center of the Zevri Dominion. Yet despite its grandeur, the human's presence did not waver its dominance. From above, the Emperor observed him, suspended on a levitating platform at the hall's apex. Tall and angular, with eyes like liquid crystal, the Emperor's gaze pierced the courtyard below. "Who dares?" His voice, both musical and sharp, echoed across the open space, bouncing off the walls in a symphony of authority. The human lifted his head slightly, meeting the Emperor's eyes without fear. "I am here to speak," he said, his voice calm, but carrying a weight that seemed to ripple through the very air. The sound of his words seemed to press against the Zevri soldiers stationed below, making them hesitate. The Emperor's lips curved into a cold, calculating smile. "Speak," he said, almost amused. "You enter uninvited, bypass my defenses, and walk unarmed into the heart of my empire. Yet you call this speaking?" He gestured, and the hall's central floor shifted. Floating platforms began to rotate and rise, rearranging themselves into a labyrinthine display of motion and light. "If you wish to speak, prove your worth first." The human's eyes scanned the shifting platforms, noting their speed, their precision. He did not flinch. His body relaxed, movements measured, as if he had anticipated every challenge before. It materialized. The Zevri soldiers tensed, weapons at the ready, unsure if they should intervene or watch in disbelief. Around him, the hall's environment reacted. Walls pulsed with energy. Gravity fields shifted unpredictably, and holographic projectors filled the space with illusions of fire and collapsing towers. The floor beneath his feet occasionally dropped several meters, replaced by narrow, glowing pathways that required perfect balance to navigate. The Emperor watched, expecting hesitation, expecting fear, but the human walked on steadily, almost casually. "Impressive," the Emperor murmured, his eyes narrowing. "But can you endure the illusions of your mind?" The hall responded immediately. Shadows elongated, forming monstrous shapes that leaped toward him. Whispers in alien tongues surrounded him, voices of the past, future, and unseen conspiracies, all designed to destabilize his focus. The human paused briefly, his gaze sweeping the chaos. Then he took another step. Each motion was deliberate, controlled. Where others might have panicked, he adapted, reading the patterns of light and shadow, gravity and illusion. Like a master decoding an ancient script, he advanced as the floating platforms rotated, each movement measured, precise, almost elegant. Above him, the Emperor's composure began to crack, just slightly. He had seen thousands of warriors, generals, even assassins attempt trials like this, but none had moved with the quiet certainty of this human. The soldiers, sensing their leaders growing unease, shifted nervously, unsure if they should continue their training protocols or intervene. The human reached the central platform, a narrow crystal bridge suspended above an abyss of swirling energy. Around him, the hall's light refracted into dizzying patterns, the shadows of impossible architecture stretching and contracting. The suspense tightened like a drawn bowstring. The moment stretched, silent, tense, charged with the anticipation of the unknown. Then, without warning, the human stopped. The human. He looked upward, directly at the Emperor, and smiled, a subtle, almost imperceptible curve of the lips. It was a gesture that carried confidence, intelligence, and a quiet defiance. It said without words, "I am not afraid. I see what you see, and I will continue." The hall seemed to pause in response, as if acknowledging his challenge. The floating platform stilled, the illusions flickered, and the whispers softened. Every Zevri in the courtyard and on the balconies held their breath. In that suspended moment, the moral was unmistakable. Courage, composure, and clarity of mind could pierce even the most intricate defenses of the most powerful empire. One individual, small against the grandeur of the universe, could move through trials designed to destroy hundreds, not with strength but with intellect, intuition, and unwavering resolve. The human stepped forward onto the final platform, ready for the next challenge. Every eye followed him, every pulse raced, and every assumption the Dominion held about fear, control, and power began to waver. One step had brought him to the heart of the Empire. The next would decide the fate of all. The central platform began to tilt slowly, shifting as if testing his balance. Above, the Emperor's eyes glinted, sharp and calculating. The human's boots barely made a sound against the crystal surface, but every observer could feel the tension in the air. The hall was no longer just a place of display, it had become a living, breathing trial. Gravity pulses, illusions, and mechanical traps converged to test the intruder, each designed to crush body and spirit alike. From the shadows of the floating platforms, spiked barriers shot outward, rotating at impossible angles. Energy grids crisscrossed the air, forming a deadly lattice. Holographic walls sprang to life, projecting visions of past Zevri heroes, their faces twisted into warnings of failure. Each illusion was carefully crafted to evoke fear, doubt, and hesitation. The human paused, his eyes scanning the labyrinth as if reading an open map. Then, in a single fluid motion, he leapt onto a narrow platform, arms balancing, landing lightly despite the sudden shift. Sparks from the failing energy grids danced around him, illuminating his calm, focused expression. For a heartbeat, the hall seemed to pause, anticipation stretching every second into eternity. The Emperor's voice rang out, amplified across the chamber. "Do you see? None before you have survived this trial. Do you even understand the forces at play?" The human's answer was silence, but his movement spoke volumes. He pivoted with precision, sliding between energy barriers, ducking illusions that lunged like predators and using the labyrinth's momentum to his advantage. Every step was calculated, as if he were in perfect synchrony with the hall itself. The soldiers' mouths fell open. Even seasoned warriors had never witnessed such fluid adaptation. The labyrinth shifted again, faster this time, rotating entire sections and opening chasms that threatened to swallow him whole. A massive holographic serpent twisted through the corridors, fangs gleaming and scales shimmering in spectral light. The human ran along the edge of a platform, leaping over the illusion, letting it coil harmlessly beneath him. From a balcony above, a young Zevri officer whispered, "He moves as though the trial itself bends to him. Is he controlling it?" The human did not falter. He reached into his suit and pressed a subtle device on his wrist. Streams of holographic data appeared in front of him, mapping the hall's energy pulses and predictive pathways. It was not brute force nor luck that carried him forward. It was observation, analysis, and intuition. Every hazard became a puzzle, every shift in the environment a clue. Below, the Emperor's composed demeanor faltered. His voice wavered slightly, betraying the first hint of doubt. How can a single human navigate what our finest minds could not? The human reached the central corridor, where platforms rotated in 3 dimensions, forming a spiral toward the Emperor's seat. Energy beams crisscrossed the space, each capable of disintegration upon contact. The human calculated trajectories, timed his leaps, and launched across the platforms in a series of elegant, precise movements. Sparks flew where his boots narrowly avoided the energy barriers. The crowd gasped collectively. The moral of the labyrinth became clear to everyone watching. Intelligence, focus, and courage can bypass even the most elaborate defenses. Physical size, strength, and sheer numbers are irrelevant against ingenuity, tempered by resolve. One human, small against the immensity of an empire, could outthink and outmaneuver forces designed to overwhelm thousands. At last, he reached the final floating platform before the Emperor's seat. His chest heaved slightly, but his eyes remained steady, absorbing the enormity of the hall and the weight of every gaze upon him. The illusions dissolved, the energy grids dimmed, and even the air seemed to hold its breath. The Emperor's voice broke the silence, now tinged with disbelief and fascination. You have surpassed every expectation. No one should have reached this point. The human stepped forward, unwavering. His single, confident step carried the weight of centuries of human resilience, a reminder that the smallest figure can challenge the mightiest forces if guided by intellect, courage, and unshakable determination. In that moment, the hall itself seemed to acknowledge his presence. Light refracted differently, shadows shifted, and a ripple of awe passed through every Zevri soldier and noble. One human had navigated the labyrinth. One human had proven that even the most intricate defenses could be challenged. And in the silence that followed, the suspense lingered. The next move, the Emperor's response, would decide not just the fate of this trial, but perhaps the future of the Dominion itself. The human stood before the Emperor, a figure smaller than the throne but larger than any challenge the hall could muster. The room seemed impossibly vast from his vantage point, a cathedral of floating platforms, energy streams, and refracted light. Yet nothing intimidated him. Every step he had taken had been deliberate, every hazard studied, every illusion mastered. Now only the Emperor remained. The Emperor's crystal eyes glinted with a mixture of anger and fascination. He lowered his levitating platform slowly, descending until he hovered just above the human. "You move through my halls as though they were yours," he said, his voice calm but edged with a razor's sharpness. "You outthink, outmaneuver, and defy every law I established. Tell me, who are you?" "I am human," the human replied, voice steady. "I come from a world you ignored, underestimated, and dismissed. I am the consequence of that choice." The Emperor laughed softly, a sound that echoed like glass fracturing. "Consequences? You speak boldly, small creature. Do you understand what defying me means? What it means to face an empire's wrath?" The human tilted his head, eyes scanning the room once more. "I understand more than you think. I understand that even the most powerful cannot foresee everything. That control is an illusion. That fear is not always enough to bend someone's will." The Emperor's smile faded. Energy began to ripple around him, a visible manifestation of the power at his command. Platforms quivered, barriers rose, and the very air seemed to hum with anticipation. "Then you wish to challenge me?" he asked, his voice a deadly melody of curiosity and threat. "I do not wish to challenge you," the human said. "I wish to make you see." The Emperor's eyes narrowed. "See? What can a human possibly show me that I, the master of this dominion, have not already seen?" The human took a deliberate step forward. The crystal floor beneath him glowed with his movement, a reflection of his unyielding resolve. "I will show you that one individual, one mind, one step, can unravel what even the strongest fear to touch. That power is not only measured by armies or weapons, but by adaptability, intelligence, and courage." The Emperor raised his hands, and suddenly the hall exploded with motion. Platforms rotated violently, energy beams converged into lethal patterns, and the illusions returned, this time more terrifying, more insistent. Shadowy forms of past conquerors leapt toward him, roaring in alien voices, trying to crush his mind before his body. The human moved. Not with panic, not with brute force, but with precision. He jumped from platform to platform, ducked and twisted around energy beams, and used the hall's motion to propel himself further. Each step was calculated, a dance between survival and demonstration. The Emperor's eyes widened, disbelief creeping into his otherwise controlled demeanor. "Impossible," he whispered. "No human, no creature could move like this. None could endure the labyrinth of my creation." The human reached the Emperor's platform, stopping just a meter from the hovering figure. And yet, here I stand, he said. One human, one step, one empire, ready to be reminded of its limits. The silence that followed was heavy, almost suffocating. The Emperor's power filled the hall, yet for the first time, it felt incomplete. The crowd of Zevri soldiers and nobles watched in awe, witnessing a single human standing unshaken in the heart of an empire. The human's gaze met the Emperor's unwavering. Every empire has a blind spot, he said. Every ruler believes control is absolute. But even in the grandest halls, even in the most elaborate labyrinths, the smallest truth remains. Resilience and ingenuity cannot be fully contained. Emperor's crystal eyes flickered, a reflection of uncertainty passing through them. Around them, the hall seemed to hold its breath. For the first time, the Zevri Dominion confronted the possibility that their invincibility was an illusion. The moral hung in the air, as palpable as the energy streams. No matter how vast, how powerful, or how feared an empire may be, the courage and intellect of a single determined individual can expose cracks in even the strongest foundations. One human, one step, could alter the course of history. The Emperor remained silent, studying the human, weighing his next move. Outside, the rest of the empire trembled at the quiet demonstration of something they had long dismissed. The audacity and capability of a species they had underestimated, and in that tension-filled silence, the suspense lingered, thick and tangible. The next choice, the Emperor's decision, would shape not only this confrontation but the fate of an entire dominion. The Emperor remained suspended above the human, a living monolith of authority. Yet for the first time, cracks of uncertainty flickered across his expression. The air in the throne hall vibrated with tension, every Zevri soldier sensing the fragile balance shifting beneath their very feet. The human did not move. One step separated him from the Empire's figurehead, yet it felt like a chasm of history, pride, and power. The floating platforms, the energy grids, and the illusions of the labyrinth had fallen silent, as though the hall itself paused to witness what might come next. "You have survived my trial," the Emperor said, his voice quieter now, almost introspective. "You have mastered every obstacle, anticipated every shift, and moved as if the labyrinth itself answers to you. How?" The human took a slow breath, letting the silence stretch, amplifying the weight of his words. "I did. Not master your labyrinth. I understood it, I observed it, I adapted. Every empire, every ruler, every system, even the most intricate, has patterns, limits, and moments of vulnerability. You cannot see everything. You cannot control everything. And that is where the truth lies." The Emperor's eyes flickered, his control over the hall subtly wavering. Energy grids, once perfectly synchronized, shimmered and misaligned. Platforms trembled. The illusions of ancient conquerors faltered, fading into fragmented shadows. The human's simple, deliberate presence had triggered something far beyond physical prowess. Doubt. Outside the chamber, across the empire, soldiers and citizens felt the tremor of disruption, not from the human but from the idea he carried. Whispers spread, a single human defying the Emperor, unbroken. The cracks in the facade of absolute power were visible now, and fear blended with awe. The human stepped forward. Each movement was deliberate, measured, yet commanding. "Every empire falls eventually," he said, voice carrying across the hall. "Not always to armies, weapons, or rebellions, but to ideas, to courage, and to those who refuse to bend." The Emperor's voice hardened again, attempting to reclaim control. "You presume much. You think your defiance can topple centuries of dominion? My fleets, my legions, my resources? I do not need to topple it," the human replied, eyes steady, unwavering. "I only need to show the cracks. Once seen, the cracks grow. Once recognized, the doubt spreads. And once the people see that even their emperor can be challenged, even he can be wrong, then the empire itself will start to crumble." The DI hall pulsed, energy shifting violently. The Emperor raised his hands, summoning a tempest of power that ripped through the floating platforms. Sparks of energy danced dangerously close, threatening to incinerate everything in their path. The human didn't flinch. Instead, he moved with uncanny precision, navigating the chaos as if the storm obeyed him. Every leap, every calculated step, sent a message to the observers. The Emperor's power was immense, but not infallible. Even the most meticulously controlled systems had vulnerabilities. Even the most fearsome rulers could be questioned. The first crack in the Emperor's dominance appeared in subtle ways. A misaligned platform, a faltering energy pulse, a ripple of uncertainty in the eyes of his soldiers. The human's presence had turned the hall into a mirror, reflecting the fragility beneath the opulence, the doubt beneath the authority. A senior Zevri commander whispered from the balcony, voice shaking. We have underestimated them, not just the human, but what they represent. Our foundation, it's fragile. The human's gaze swept the hall, taking in every reaction, every subtle shift. He had already done what he came to do, not by destroying armies or hurling weapons, but by demonstrating a single truth. Resilience, intellect, and courage can break an empire from within. The Emperor hovered silently now, eyes locked with the humans. The hall itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the first definitive sign of who would claim dominance, not through force but through presence, perception, and principle. The suspense was palpable. One step, one human, one moment of clarity, and the Empire, for the first time in millennia, could no longer hide the cracks beneath its grandeur. The moral became clear to all who watched. No structure, no matter how vast, no matter how fearsome, can withstand the unyielding determination and ingenuity of an individual who refuses to be crushed. One human had illuminated a truth the Empire could not ignore, and in doing so, had begun the slow, inevitable unraveling of what once seemed unassailable. And in that tense silence, the audience, both Zevri and human, understood. The turning point had come. The first fracture had appeared, and history would remember who had caused it. The throne hall trembled with an energy unlike anything the Zevri Dominion had ever experienced. Platforms shuddered, crystal walls hummed with dissonance, and the air itself seemed charged with the tension of uncertainty. The Emperor hovered, his power immense yet visibly strained, as the human remained calm, unflinching, and deliberate. Outside the hall, the first signs of unrest began to ripple across the Empire. Soldiers and citizens alike whispered to one another, their fear mingling with curiosity. Doubt was contagious. The cracks the human had revealed were spreading like wildfire. Even loyal commanders, trained to follow without question, hesitated. A single human, one mind, one will, had demonstrated a truth the Zevri had long refused to see. Their empire was not invincible. In the throne hall, the human stepped forward again, each movement precise, deliberate. "You control armies, fleets, and cities," he said, voice echoing across the chamber. "But you do not control thought. You cannot suppress courage, ingenuity, or the desire to act when injustice becomes clear. Even your soldiers feel it now, the weight of doubt." The Emperor's crystal eyes flared with fury. Energy streamed from him, reshaping the hall into a violent, shifting labyrinth once more. Platforms spun, laser grids carved the air, and spectral forms of ancient conquerors returned, lunging toward the human with shrieks of condemnation. Yet he did not retreat. Instead, he moved with uncanny precision, each step a calculated defiance, each leap a silent declaration that fear could not dictate his path. And then, from the shadows of the hall, unexpected allies emerged. Dissident Zevri soldiers, those who had quietly questioned the Emperor's methods for years, activated hidden energy disruptors, sabotaging sections of the labyrinth. Sections of the Emperor's perfect control began to falter, platforms locking in place, illusions shattering, and energy beams misfiring. The human did not stop to acknowledge them. Instead, he used the disruption to his advantage, advancing closer to the Emperor with every calculated step. Each movement, each precise maneuver became a demonstration to the remaining loyalists. The Emperor's omnipotence was no longer absolute. The Emperor roared, a sound that shook the hall to its core and unleashed the full breadth of his power. Energy spirals collided with the floor, walls, and ceiling, sending shockwaves through the chamber. The human dodged and vaulted, navigating the chaos as though the storm itself answered to him. Every step he took challenged the Emperor's authority, and every action inspired the hidden rebels to rise. "Do you see now?" the human shouted, voice cutting through the energy storm. "One idea, one truth, one human can ignite a change no empire can contain. You can try to crush it, but it spreads faster than you can control. Fear is no longer enough." The Emperor faltered for the first time, his energy surging unpredictably, almost violently. Cracks appeared in the crystal floor, and the barriers he had erected to suppress dissent began to fail. Around him, soldiers whispered in disbelief, their confidence crumbling. Some turned to aid the human, inspired by the courage and clarity he exuded. Others froze, trapped between loyalty and fear, witnessing the collapse of a system they had always believed unshakable. The hall became a battlefield of ideology as much as power. Sparks flew, energy surged, platforms shifted unpredictably, and the illusions of ancient conquerors shattered into fragments. The human advanced steadily, unaffected by the chaos, a singular force of will in the center of a crumbling empire. Outside, the cracks spread. Across fleets, cities, and colonies, whispers of defiance grew louder. The Empire's perfect control faltered, and the first murmurs of rebellion rose like the first tremors of an earthquake. The human's presence had shown them a truth they could no longer ignore. If one could challenge the Emperor, many could rise. In the throne hall, the Emperor's eyes reflected a rare vulnerability. He had underestimated the power of one individual's resolve, the contagion of courage, and the inevitability of change when truth stood unshaken. The walls of his dominion, once thought eternal, were beginning to crumble, not from weapons but from conviction. And in that suspense-filled moment, the moral was undeniable. No empire can survive when its people begin to see the cracks, and no ruler remains untouchable when one individual refuses to bow to fear. One human had illuminated the path, and now the fall of a dominion had begun. The throne hall no longer resembled the pristine, controlled domain it had once been. Platforms hung crooked, energy grids sparked and sizzled, and the illusions of ancient conquerors lay scattered like broken mirrors. The air itself was thick, with tension, charged with the echoes of rebellion and the palpable fear of an emperor whose dominion was unraveling before his eyes. The human stood at the center of the chaos, calm and deliberate. One step had brought him closer to the Emperor than any soldier or diplomat ever dared. That step now symbolized more than courage. It symbolized possibility, defiance, and the fragile, unstoppable force of truth. The Emperor hovered above, his immense form trembling with fury and disbelief. "Impossible," he growled, voice reverberating across the shattered hall. "I control fleets, armies, worlds. How can one insignificant human topple what took millennia to build?" The human did not flinch. He advanced another step, slow and deliberate, letting every movement broadcast a message. Fear and power are fragile when challenged by conviction. "You built an empire on fear," he said, voice carrying across the hall, sharp and unwavering. "You ruled through control and intimidation, but control is an illusion, and intimidation fades the moment courage rises. One step, one act of defiance is enough to show the cracks, and once they are seen, they cannot be unseen." Energy surged violently as the Emperor unleashed the last of his power, streams of light and shadow colliding in blinding arcs. Platforms wrenched from their anchors, and the crystal walls splintered into shards that rained down like frozen lightning. The human vaulted through the chaos, his movements precise and fearless, each step a challenge to the very essence of the Emperor's authority. And then, it happened. Across the throne hall, the dissenters and rebels the human had inspired rose in unison. Energy disruptors and concealed weapons activated simultaneously, striking at the Emperor's defenses. Soldiers who had once bowed now stood defiant, their resolve amplified by the human's presence. The illusion of invincibility shattered. The Emperor screamed, a sound that shook the hall to its foundation as the fractures in his power multiplied. Platforms collapsed, energy grids misfired, and even the illusions of ancient conquerors dissolved into sparks that vanished into nothingness. For the first time, the Emperor was truly vulnerable. The human took the final step. Just one step separated him from the figure who had ruled an empire with absolute authority. That step carried centuries of human resilience, ingenuity, and courage. It carried the message that no matter how immense the dominion, no matter how meticulously controlled, the spirit of an individual could ignite change beyond imagination. With that single step, the Emperor's power began to unravel entirely. The throne, once a symbol of unchallengeable control, cracked and crumbled beneath him. Energy surged in every direction, destroying the last of the hall's illusions and leaving nothing but shards, smoke, and the stunned silence of the witnesses. Across the Empire, the tremors were felt instantly. Soldiers dropped their weapons. Governors hesitated. Citizens whispered, then shouted, realizing for the first time that the Emperor was not infallible. The human had demonstrated the impossible. One individual could topple a system that seemed eternal. The human turned, looking at the crowd of rebels, citizens, and even former loyalists. His voice, calm but resonant, cut through the chaos. An empire built on fear will always fall when courage rises. History belongs not to those who seek to dominate, but to those who refuse to be dominated. The Emperor fell, defeated not by armies or weapons, but by a simple truth. Power cannot withstand the awakening of minds and hearts determined to see justice, freedom, and hope. The moral became clear to all who witnessed it. Change is unstoppable when even a single individual dares to act. One step can illuminate the cracks in the mightiest structures. One human can inspire a movement. One act of courage can crumble an empire. And in the silence that followed the collapse, the galaxy remembered. They remembered that no empire, no matter how vast, could suppress the force of a determined individual. One step, one human, had changed the course of history forever.